Study Section 7 Output Determination in the General Equilibrium Framework. Introduction. In Chapter 5, we examined how the ISLM framework can be used to analyze how output and interest rate change through fiscal and monetary policies. In that chapter, we assumed that output was only affected by changes in government fiscal stance and monetary policy stance. That is, we looked at the economy from the demand side. Chapter 6 discussed the supply side of the economy by looking at the role played by the labor market in the wages and output determination. We will recollect that increase in real wage tends to reduce natural rate of unemployment and hence increase in natural level of output. From the supply side, labor market situation, price level, and the structure of goods market tend to determine output level. The lesson from the analysis is that it is impossible to explain output determination without considering the fiscal and monetary policies that affect the demand side and the labor market and the structure of the goods market that affect the supply side. We take account of the equilibrium in the goods market, the financial market, and the labor market in this chapter. When we combine these three markets together, we are studying the general equilibrium analysis of output determination. We first start by using what we understand about the goods and financial market to build the aggregate demand. We will later use what we understand about the labor market to build the aggregate supply. We will then merge the two equilibria to produce the general equilibrium, which we will now use to determine aggregate output and prices. Objectives. The objectives of this lecture are to further deepen student understanding of output determination. So, at the end of this lecture, students should be able to do the following: differentiate between the supply side and the demand side of the economy, conceptualize the general equilibrium framework, derive aggregate demand and aggregate supply relations, explain the effect of fiscal and monetary policies on the AD to AS curve, investigate the implication of other macroeconomic shocks external to fiscal and monetary policies, such as oil price shock, climate change, etc. Determination of aggregate demand. Aggregate demand is defined as the combination of price level and output that leaves total demand at equilibrium. That is, it shows the level of price that is consistent with a given level of output that is demanded by the economic agent. To keep things easy, we will assume that there is not expectation and the economy is closed. We will also assume that expected interest rate is 0, which implies that real interest rate is equal to nominal interest rate. We can use these two relationships to build the aggregate demand as illustrated in Figure 7.1. Panels B and C are not new. Panel C describes the transmission mechanisms through which changes in price level affect aggregate expenditure. As can be seen, if price level rises from P0 to P1, this affects the wealth, reduces real value of households' wealth, and to beef up future consumption today had to fall. This will then shift IS curve from IS0 to IS1, and as we can see, holding the stock of money and demand for money constant, aggregate spending and hence output will fall. The second scenario can be explained through the financial sector. When price increases, purchasing power falls, holding nominal demand for money constant, household will demand for more money, and this shifts the LM curve upwards and the interest rate rises. Figure 7.2 Determination of aggregate demand relation using financial market. Shift in AD curve. We know that AD curve is derived from the IS and LM relations, hence all variables in the IS and LM relations are good candidates that will shift AD curve. Note that changes in price level will cause a movement along the AD curve. Put in other words, at a given price level, say P0 in figure 7.2, anything that causes a shift in IS or LM curve will also lead to a shift in AD curve. Figure 7.3 shows how AD shifts due to a shift in IS curve. The shift in IS curve is given by an increase in government spending. The aggregate demand relation is summarized in the following equation. Note that I is not in the relation because it is also endogenous, so the factors that determine aggregate demand are the purely exogenous variables such as real money balances, government spending, and taxes. It turns out that fiscal and monetary policy variables will cause a shift in aggregate demand. As we can see, both government spending and nominal money stock will positively increase output, while increase in taxes and price level will reduce output level. Note also that other factors like wealth acquisition, consumer confidence, etc. should be put in the equation because they also contribute to changes in aggregate demand holding price level constant. Determination of aggregate supply. Aggregate supply is defined as a combination of price level and output that leaves supply of goods and services at equilibrium. We can use what we learned in chapter 6 to characterize aggregate supply. Recall that the wage setting and price setting relation in the labor market is given as. The first rule reminds us that nominal wage is affected by expected price level, unemployment, and other important variables like bargaining power, etc. The second line, which is the price setting relations, shows that price level is affected by nominal wage and the markup price. If we substitute the first equation for W in the second equation, we have. This equation says that price level is determined by expected price, the markup price, and unemployment rate. Since we are interested in the relationship between price level and output, we need to express equation 7.3 in terms of output Y. We know from equation 6.9 that. Now, plug this equation into equation 7.2 to get. Or, equation 7.3 is the aggregate supply relation. The relation gives the price level at which firms are willing to supply a given level of output. Equation 7.3 has two important characteristics that need to explore very well. First, there is a one-to-one positive relationship between actual price level and expected price level. That is, an increase in expected price level by 100% leads to 100% increase in actual price level. How? Second, increase in output leads to increase in employment, the production function. The increase in employment leads tighter labor market. The tighter the labor market, the higher the nominal wage, the wage determination, and finally, increase in nominal wage leads to increase in cost of production and hence increase in price. The curve that relates aggregate output to price level is called the aggregate supply curve. It is upward sloping, implying that an increase in output will lead to increase in price level. Note that the curve is drawn for a given level of expected price. It is to relate aggregate supply to natural output level. As we have said, aggregate supply curve is drawn for a given level of expected price P raised to power E. The price level increases with the level of output. This implies that if output is very small, actual price will be less than expected price. On the other hand, if output is very large, actual price will be greater than expected price. Another possibility is that output produced is such that the actual price equal to expected price. From our previous knowledge, if expected price is just equal to actual price, P is equal to P raised to power E, output will be at the natural level of output. That is, if P is equal to P raised to power E, then Y is equal to Yn. Thus, in the price output space, a point like A in figure 7.5 shows where actual price is equal to expected price and the output that is consistent with it is the natural level of output, Yn. Thus, when output equals to natural level of output, actual price is equal to expected price. At point like B, to the right of point A, actual output is greater than natural level of output, and there will be pressure on price to rise above the expected price. At point like C, to the left of point A, output is below the natural level and there will be pressure on price to be lower than expected price. Recall that when output is at its natural level, unemployment is at its natural rate, while unemployment is also at its natural rate. Therefore, we can say formally that when output is at its natural level, unemployment rate will also be at its natural rate and price level will be consistent with what both wage and price setters are expecting. When output is above natural rate, when Y is greater than Yn, unemployment rate is less than its natural rate, U is less than Un, and so we expect price level to be higher than what wage setters imply. Why? We know that as unemployment rate reduces, labor market becomes tighter and tighter, and this will lead to increase in wages by the wage setters, and this leads to increase in price level more than expected. Conversely, when the economy is operating below natural level of output, it is the case that unemployment rate is greater than natural rate of unemployment. This is the same as saying that labor market is slack. Slack labor market will lead to low wage, and this in turn leads to lower price level. It is now time to establish the equilibrium output in the context of goods market, financial market, and labor market. We now know that expected price level has an important implication for actual price level in the aggregate supply relation. Thus, a change in output and prices depends importantly on the expectations formed by the wage setters. Meanwhile, to keep things easy, we shall assume that the wage setters has a good guess about price expectation, and it is the case that the expected price next year is this year's actual price. Or to say that wage setters guess right that last year's price will be this year's expected price. Therefore, we can rewrite the aggregate demand and aggregate supply relations established in equations 7.1 and 7.3 as follows, where we use the fact that. Now, let us ask a nice question here. Assuming that fiscal policy and monetary policy are left untouched, that is, no change in G, T, and M in the AD relations, and that the labor market is not disturbed, that is, U, L, and X are left unaffected, will output remain the same over time? That is, if government does not change its spending style and the monetary authorities is satisfied with the existing money stock while there is no change in the labor market. Will the output produced this year be the same next year and the year hence? We can use the equilibrium AD to AS framework to answer this question. Assuming that the economy is at point A on the AD to AS relation curve shown in figure 7.6, the intersection of AD and AS gives the equilibrium level of output. At point A, the goods, financial, and labor market are all in equilibrium, and the price and output that satisfy this equilibrium are given as PT and YT respectively. Note that there is no reason why actual output should be the same as natural level of output. Why? In the graph, we deliberately draw the equilibrium output YT to exceed natural output Yn. In other words, we assume that the economy is operating above natural level of output, and by implication the economy's natural rate of unemployment is lower than the actual unemployment rate. We know that once this is the case, price level will exceed expected price. Why should this be so? Recall that when output exceeds its natural level, unemployment rate is lower than natural rate, and so this makes labor market become tighter. Tighter labor market leads to increase in nominal wages, and this leads to increase in cost of production. High cost of production will lead to increase in price level more than what is expected. Thus, this year's price is greater than the prevailing expected price. What will happen next year? Equation 7.5 tells us what will happen. Next year's price depends on this year's expected price. That is, note that as this year's price level exceeds last year's, aggregate supply next year that is determined by the price level this year PT is higher than aggregate supply this year defined by PT-1 in bracket. But because the economy is still operating above natural level, there will be pressure on price to rise more than expected, and this leads to upward shift of aggregate supply from AS0 to AS1 as shown in figure 7.7. The equilibrium level of output next year is at E prime, where the actual price next year exceeds the expected price. And by implication, this will lead to decrease in output. We see that the output produced in YT plus 1 is closer to the natural level of output Yn. In 2 years' time, the aggregate demand relation becomes. Again, the equation tells us that in 2 years hence, as long as actual price is greater than expected price, upper year's output should exceed next year's. If we draw the AS curve for the second year, we see that the equilibrium will be at points such as E prime prime. At this point, price level is higher than expected, and hence we expect output to fall again. This adjustment continues until actual output is just equal to natural level of output, and at this point, expected price level will be equal to actual price level. The wisdom from this analysis is that as long as the economy is operating above its natural level, price level will be on the increase. Increase in price level will lead to increase in demand for money, which will invariably raise interest rate. The higher interest rate will lead to lower demand and hence lower output, and the economy moves along the AD curve until it eventually reaches point E prime prime. Given this scenario, we can answer the question raised that if fiscal and monetary policies are not used while the labor market experiences not external shock, will output level remain constant? Whether output will change or not depends on the position that the economy is operating. If the economy is operating above natural level of output, we expect upward adjustment to take place naturally until the economy settles at its natural level. If the economy is operating below natural level of output, there will be downward adjustment until natural level of output is achieved. It is only when the economy is operating in its natural level of output that there will be no adjustment. We should know that the adjustment takes place through changes in price level. Generally, two important lessons can be drawn from this analysis. First, in the short run, output can be above or below its natural level. This is because changes in any of the variables that enters the aggregate supply or aggregate demand leads to changes in output and prices. Second, in the long run, output will eventually return to its natural level, and the adjustment process works in through prices. Using the framework to analyze the effect of fiscal policy. Assuming that the government observes that the economy is not doing fine and so it wants to intervene by increasing its spending, that is, the government wants to run budget deficit to finance recession. Now, assuming that the economy is operating below its natural level of output as shown in figure 7.8, increase in government spending shifts the aggregate demand from the AD0 to AD1. If the price was fixed, increase in the demand will lead to the economy operating above its natural level. This shows that the initial effect of deficit financing tend to overshoot the economy. With output exceeding its natural level, this year's prices are higher than last year's. As a result, the wage setters will increase wage, and this will lead to increase in cost of production, which will lead to reduction in production. As they do this, as curve shifts from AS0 to AS1 so that the economy adjusts to equilibrium at point C, the natural level output, note that although the hit on the economy has been eliminated and it was done at high price level. So the key message from this analysis is that when the economy is in its medium run, if the government intends to end recession through budget deficit, it will lead to high price level. So the choice is whether to allow for high price level, inflation, and achieve increase in output and decrease in unemployment, or prevent inflation at the expense of low output and high unemployment. This scenario will shift the IS curve from IS1 to IS2. The economy will be operating at natural level and natural rate of unemployment, but this is achieved through high interest rate. Therefore, when the government finances recession with budget deficit, when the economy is in the medium run, it will not only lead to inflation, it will also generate high interest rate. But will price level and interest rate rise immediately? No. It will take some time before firms and consumers adjust their spending. In the process of adjustment, the economy moves along the AD1 while the financial sector moves along LM from point C to point B. Monetary expansion in the medium run. Positive shocks. How does the economy adjust to its natural level when there is monetary expansion? At a given price level, say PT, monetary expansion will lead to increase in real money stock, and this will lead to increase in output. This action will shift the AD curve to the right. Figure 7.10 shows that when AD curve shifts from AD0 to AD1 following monetary expansion, the equilibrium point moves from E to E prime. At this point, output increases from YN to YT, and price level also increases from PT-1 to PT. Note that at natural level of output, expected price is equal to previous price. Thus, when there is a shock to the system and the price rises, wage and price setters will still expect that price will increase in the future. Why? Note that when actual output exceeds its natural level, unemployment will be below its natural rate, and so the labor market becomes tighter. Tighter labor market will cause workers to expect increase in price level, and as a result, they will demand for increase in wages. As wage increases, cost of production increases, and so price level rises. Given the expectation about price level, the AS curve shifts to the left until the system settles at point E prime prime, where the economy returns to its natural level. The adjustment takes place gradually, and it may take some time, depending on how far the actual output is from its natural level, the speed with which agents form expectations, and so on. Although We may not know the actual time that the economy will return to its natural level. It will not be immediate. One important point we need to note is that as price increases, output adjusts to its natural level so that when the economy finally settles, price level will be at high level. But what will happen to interest rate and the financial market, the LM curve? When the authorities expand money stock, figure 7.1 tells us that LM curve will shift from LM0 to LM1 and the equilibrium move from E to E prime and interest rate falls from I0 to I1. Meanwhile, if the price level is not changing, increase in nominal money stock will move the LM curve from LM1 to LM2 so that the economy will be at point E prime. At this point, actual output is far above its natural level and so there is excess liquidity in the system. This will mount pressure on price level to rise. Thus, even in the short run, price level can rise as the economy moves along the AS curve so that the LM curve shifts back to LM1. This will lead to increase in interest rate and this will reduce the overheating of the economy. Meanwhile, because this is just a partial adjustment, since actual output is still above its natural level, price level will continue to increase and this causes reduction in consumption and investment and hence output. Over time, the economy moves along the IS curve until it finally settles at point E. When the economy settles at this point, the result is clear. Output will fall and interest rate will rise. We see that it appears the increase in nominal money stock has been completely eliminated by high price level. How? As the economy moves back to point E, LM curve is back to where it started from, but price level has risen. Thus, the increase in money stock has been neutralized by the exact increase in price level. Thus, when the economy is at its natural level, monetary policy will generate high price level with no real effect on output. The lesson so far is that in the short run, monetary expansion leads to increase in output and a decrease in interest rate. It will also lead to increase in price level. Over time, prices increase without any effect on output and interest rate. This is an example of supply shock, and the shock is external because the cause of that shock is not affected economy. In this section, we shall use what we know about AD to AS framework to analyze this type of adverse shock on the concerned economy. Assuming that the economy is at point E and output is at its natural level Yn, figure 7.12, before the shock, at this level, aggregate price is constant so that Pt plus 1 is equal to Pt is equal to Pt minus 1. Note that oil acts as an input in production. Thus, as oil price rises, cost of production also increases. Firms will in turn increase their markup price so as to partially offset the high production cost. Increase in markup price will reduce real wage and this shifts the price setting curve downward, and by implication, natural rate of unemployment will increase. A rising natural rate of unemployment implies a decrease in natural level of employment. Since we assume that productivity is constant, it follows that natural level of output will also fall. So what follows? In the short run, aggregate supply will shift upwards. This is true because, as we have demonstrated, increase in oil price will reduce output. In the short run, the economy will be moving along the AD north and settles at point E. which is the short-run level of output. So what can we say is that in the short run, the effect of increase in oil price is to reduce natural level of output while price level increases minimally. What happens in the medium run? We will first assume for a moment that aggregate demand remains the same. We shall relax this assumption very soon. With this assumption, the economy will actually be operating at the intersection of AD-AS, which is given by point E. Note that in the short run, the economy should settle at point E, producing YS level of output. But the level of output satisfying natural level of output is Yn. Since Ys is greater than Yn, it means there will be further pressure on price to rise, and in the process, the economy adjusts along the AD curve until it reaches point E prime. At point E prime, price increases further and output decreases further. This process is what is called stagflation, that is, an economy characterized by continuous rise in price level and declining output. We can quickly consolidate the three types of shocks we have discussed so far. Deficit, financing, and monetary expansion are positive shocks, while increase in oil price produces adverse supply shock but could be positive demand shock. In the short run, the positive demand shock produces increase in price and increase in output. Adverse supply shock creates increase in price and decrease in output. Over time, positive demand shock coming from fiscal expansion leads to persistent increase in price level and an increase in output. Which one dominates depends on the slopes of the AD and AS, the magnitude of expansion and the speed of adjustment. Positive demand shocks coming from monetary expansion produces persistent increase in output with no effect on output. Adverse supply shocks produces persistent increase in price and decrease in output. Please note the assumptions under each scenario. If any of the assumptions changes, outcome will also change. Bearing occasional hoarding, pipeline vandalization, and other informal factors that can hinder supply of this product, any change in world oil price is well absorbed by the government subsidies. Even as the government commences active deregulation of the downstream sector and trying to cancel all subsidies facilities, it is still the case that changes in oil price may not reflect significantly in the prices of petrol, diesel, and so on if the supply side is effectively productive. Therefore, we can conjecture that in the case of Nigeria, movement in oil price will affect the economy through government spending decision. It follows that if government intends to increase spending, it can do so by allocating more revenue from oil to other sectors such as power, transport, and education instead of borrowing. However, if oil price falls, the authorities might be able to do this, but if the oil price falls, it may not be able to expand. Hence, decrease in oil price will reduce government spending if government does not borrow. How does this affect the economy? Assuming that the economy is operating at its natural level before the shock, that is, the economy is at the point A in figure 7.13, the price that is consistent with this level of output is Pt minus 1. Decrease in oil price will reduce government spending, and by the AD relation, equation 7.4, AD curve will shift downwards from AD0 to AD1, holding other variables constant in the short run. Later, it will lead to decrease in price level, then decrease in output. This implies that oil price decline will lead in the short run to the recession and by implication the natural rate of unemployment will increase. What follows? Over time, output is below its natural level and price is lower than expected. Since price and wage setters assume that last year's price falls, this year's price will also fall. Hence, price at time t is expected to reduce markup price so that real wage increases. This will allow firms to hire more workers and hence increases output. Therefore, aggregate supply continues to shift downwards and output continues to increase. Unemployment will also continue to increase until natural level of output is achieved. The economy thus moves along the AD1 curve until point E prime is reached. At this point, the economy returns to its natural level, but price level has reduced. Thus, if an economy can be correctly characterized by our model, it means that sudden fall in oil price level will only create a tentative economic distortion, but it will be an eventual benefit because output will adjust to its natural level with low price level. First scenario, deficit financing fiscal policy expansion. In the short run, in the long run, in the short run, P and Y. In the long run, P and YN is achieved. Second scenario, monetary expansion. In the short run, P and Y. In the long run, large. P with no change in YN. Third scenario, adverse external shock increase in world oil price. In the short run, oil price, PY. In the long run, IPY. First scenario, positive external shock, decrease in world oil price. In the short run, oil price. In the long run, IP with no change in Y. Summary. Aggregate demand shows the relationship between price level and output when account is taken of the equilibrium goods and financial markets. Aggregate supply is the relationship between price level and output when we consider equilibrium labor market. Aggregate demand is derived from equilibrium goods and financial market, while aggregate supply is determined from equilibrium labor market. In the aggregate supply relation, expected price level, markup over cost, and other factors affecting the labor market play major roles. An increase in price level reduces real money supply, increases interest rate, and reduces output. High expected price increases actual price level, reduces real wage, increases unemployment, and reduces output level. General equilibrium is attained when all the markets are at equilibrium, and this is the equilibrium of AD and AS curves. At this equilibrium, a unique price level is associated with a unique output level. We can use the AD-AS framework to analyze the short and long-run effect of economic distortion such as fiscal deficit financing, debt servicing, monetary consolidation, stroke expansion, consumer confidence, and external shocks such as oil price change, oil quota changes, climate change, global financial crisis, and so on. In any of the shocks, the economy undergoes both short-run and long-run transition. The effect in the short run is not the same as the case in the long run. In particular, the effect on activity following demand or supply shocks may be very large in the short run but small over time. The effect may be large for a while but peters out completely over time. The effect may be negative in the short run but lead to eventual positive effect. The response of output to economic shocks is usually called economic fluctuations or the business cycle. The dynamic effect of these shocks on output, price level, and interest rate is called the shocks propagation mechanism. This is the end of study section 7. Thanks for listening.